Hello everyone. My name is Zhixiao Zhang. Today I will introduce this paper titled Comprehensive Privacy Analysis of Deep Learning. And the subtitle is Passive and Active White Box Inference Attacks Against the Centralized and Federated Learning. This paper was published on 2019 article in Symposium on Security and Privacy. I will introduce this paper by the next 6 parts. For the attack observations, there have 2 inference methods. The first one is blank box inference. For the blank box inference, the attacker can obtain the prediction on arbitrary input, but he cannot access the model parameters. For the white box inference, the attacker can access the whole model and the parameters and the hyperparameters. And he also can access the predictions and the input X. He also can access the hidden liars HX. This paper focuses on the white box inference, and for the white box inference, here is a target model. It's a deep learning neural network. It's the first layer and the last layer. So the attacker can access the whole model. So he can access the input X and the parameters, the first layer parameters W1 and the loss and the label, and the output. If the attacker can only access the output fx, then it will be a blank box inference. Because we know the first layer for the same distribution, for the same input distribution, the first layer tend to contain less information about the data. So in this paper, they used different. So in this paper, they analyzed the component separately, and fed the component into the attack model. Here is an inference attack model. They have 2 components. First one is a feature extraction, and the second one is encoder and component. The gradient and activation functions and output loss and label could be the input of the attack model. And in this paper, they separately analysis each component. So the output of the feature extraction would reshape each submodular component into a flat vector and fed into the encoder component. And for the supervised membership inference, the output of the encoder could be the membership probability of the input data. And if the adversary do not have known samples from the target training, it's the supervised inference. There have two steps. First one is they use the encoder and decoder architecture to compute some features. For example, maybe he would calculate the loss of the gradient of norm, and the cross entropy. And the second, and in the second step, they can use a cluster algorithm to cluster each component into two clusters. The two clusters would be the membership cluster and the non-membership cluster. Here are two different inference targets for the central.
I have a question here. Can you go back to the previous slides? So you mean this is an inference attack? So what is the goal? What kind of inference attack are they doing? What's the goal here? What do you want to?
The goal is to influence a membership in the target model or not.
What do you mean by inference a membership of a target model or not? Target model is a model, right? So what do you mean by membership inference for a target model?
The target model was trained by some the target model was trained by some data set, and also want to know the X is in the training data set or not.
Oh, so they want to find out, give an example, whether this example was used for training the model or not.
Yeah.
Okay, but this is one type of inference attack, right? So we should have other inference attack, like the model reconstruction attack. I think they should mention that as well, because this is a survey paper, right? So what's the difference? But if you say the attack method here, looks like I didn't say why this is used only for membership inference attack. Are there a general attack method here using the encoder, decoder?
I'm not sure this method can be used in otherwise, but this paper talked about the inference attack, membership inference attack.
So they don't. So you mean that they didn't mention about the model reconstruction attack or model inference attack?
Yeah. They only talk about the inference attack.
No. Inference attack is just like it's just a privacy attack.
They talk about the membership inference attack.
Okay. Yeah, it's weird to me because if you think about the title there, looks like they should talk about both, not just the membership inference attack. But anyway, yeah, you can just go continue. I will just check it later. Yeah.
Okay.
Could you go to previous slide? Yes. My gut feeling is here use unsupervised learning to classify whatever into different groups, right? So here probably you can further infer, from your previous slides, you can further infer the models, the models belongs to different group. I just confused that, the inference attack happens on the data set, right? So how can you build up the connection between the model and the data set? You didn't mention that? In other words, I think the pink one here, uses unsupervised learning. It only classifies, the output, and you further infer, the corresponding model classification, right? So for this group model belongs to, say, group 1, model 3, 4, 5 belongs to group 2, right? But that's only for the model. Then how can you build up the connection between the model and the data set? Because your ultimate goal is try to inference, if the data set is a user or not, if this data is a user or not, right? Or say if this data is in the data set or not. So how can you build up that connection?
I think for here we have a target model. So the input of the target model have the same distribution, but the subgradient of the active functions may be different for the training data set on the non-training data set. So they can cluster the input into 2 clusters, and one cluster would be the memberships, and another is non-members.
Okay, so
So do they require, for example, here, do they require that the D prime and the D are from the same distribution?
okay.
They have introduced for the input of X. They said the X have the same distribution.
X has the same distribution. Why you make that requirement? Is there a reason for that? For example, if X is from a different distribution, so you can so the target model can easily find out that well, this does not belong to the training data set. Is that what you mean?
I think generally the input data would have the same distribution, or they have not much difference.
Could you go to
so
the next page? Probably if we check the loss function and the attack function, you can also sort of go to question.
That means we cannot justify the data in the training data set or not just by the raw data. We must need the more information, like the subgradient or
So what does this loss function mean? I mean, what do they do? So this loss function they want to minimize?
Yes, minimize.
Why? What does it mean? Why minimizing this loss function translates into this inference? Can you explain that?
This loss function is for the supervised learning. So so the output of the encoder is HD is membership probability of D is D belongs to target data set. So if HD belongs to the target data set, then this part would be 0, and if HD is not belong to the data set, this part will be 0. Is that right?
But why do you why by minimizing this why you minimize this objective can give you the optimal attack method? Here you want to predict a HD or this probability if D does not belong to D. So I mean small d does not belong to capital D. Then you want it to be 0 as small as possible.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the second term. I can understand. So for the first term, if D belongs to both D prime and D, then it should be as large as possible. That basically means that they should be approximately 1. Then the first term will be smaller as well. Okay. Okay. But then D prime here.
You just want a convex objective.
Yeah. I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. There are two inference target. First one is centralized training. For the centralized training, the attack observe the target model F on the training data set D. He also can fine-tune the model by his new data set D data and get a new model F data. And for the federated learning, that is distributed learning. And if the attacker is an aggregator, he can change the download WT, and if the attacker is a local client, he can change the upload parameters WT.
So what can you go? So what do you want? So for the standalone centralized training, what do you mean by the attacker loads D and load D delta? I thought that's their purpose. They want to differentiate. So what do you mean by here? I mean, the inference target standalone versus. So I mean, what's the meaning for this slide? What's the meaning for the figure here?
Okay. For the centralized training, the attacker already have a model F. Then he want to know a data set is on the training data set D or not. So he can use the data set D data to fine tune the original model. In this process, he can get the parameters. So he can use these parameters to train a network to predict the data set.
you still didn't quite answer my question. My question basically like you draw a figure there, right?
Yeah.
You have assume that F is what you know, and then you have a D delta. So you mean that you want to figure out whether D delta belongs to D or what's the meaning there?
I guess the data is, you know, is just an initial data set attacker has or something. Then I don't know. Then probably through certain kind of training, they get a F delta, try to say it's close to the, you know, the real F delta or something. I really.
D is a training data set, and the attacker might use his a new data set data to fine tune the model.
Yeah, you found to assume that you found to the model, you get an F delta.
Yeah.
So the next step, what's the next step?
Yeah, no next step because in the fine tune, the process of fine tune, they can get the input of the attack model.
Through the fine tune, I'll get the input of that.
In the process of fine tune.
Oh yeah, I have an F. If I fine tune that by further training it on delta, I will be able to get a new model and the corresponding model, the training parameters there. So, and then you mean that we're using the method that you mentioned before to check whether a D delta belongs to D or
yeah.
If you go back, can you go back to the previous slide, the method? Here, how you you are trying to use the membership inference attack, right? And then assume that the membership inference attack, you want to train a model, inference attack model, so that given a input sample, the attack model will be able to tell you whether this sample belongs to your original training data or not, right?
Right.
Okay, so I assume that, okay, so how you do that? So you are given
in the process of fine tuning, you can get a list of the for example, a list of the gradient, and you can use the gradient to train your attack model.
But I don't know whether you use fine tuning. That's fine. Let's say, okay, let's say you have X here, you have the D delta here. This is the data that you have. You have an original model, you fine tuning that, then you get a F delta, and then you can accumulate so many things, okay? And then you use this one to train the model, but you still don't know whether the D delta belongs to D or not, right? Whether they have some. Are you assuming that you know some existing examples in D, which you have put into the D delta? So they consist of two parts. One is that you have some true training data. Another one is false training data.
Yes.
And then use this supervised singular to train the model here.
Yes, for the D data, it has some data set some data set belongs to the D. Because it's a supervised learning.
Oh, okay. So they are. So can you go to the next slide? So basically, they are trying to minimize this by training the attack model to minimize this loss, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But this is the supervised one.
Yeah, it's a supervised.
So how about if you have some unsupervised one? How can you train the model? Train the attack model.
Train the model. Unsupervised.
Supervised. Yeah, supervised, I think according to your explanation, I kind of understand. So, but on unsupervised one, how you solve that? Use the, because you don't know whether the example that you tested it belongs to the
Okay.
original training data or not,
Yeah.
right? It's not like this one. You don't have the any labels. So what are you going to do?
For the unsupervised, you can see in the if the data is not in the training data set, this component may be different for the membership or non-membership. So for the unsupervised, they use they reconstruct some key features of the input data. Like they can use the loss or the gradient of loss. Because if the data in the training data set, the gradient loss, the distribution of the gradient loss may be different. So they can use a different to cluster.
Yeah. Given if you, for example, same as what you mentioned, while you have a d delta, you don't know whether d delta includes the true training data or not. So you can fine tune on F, and then you get a F delta. That's fine. And you are, you cannot perhaps you cannot fine tune because now you don't have any label, so you cannot fine tune that. So you can apply d delta to F. You will be able to get some
features.
No features. What do you mean by features? If you are if you don't have any label, so basically you get a d delta, you apply F, you will give a prediction, and this prediction, let's say you have this prediction is different from the true prediction, true label. So you get a predicted label, you get your own true label, you will be able to obtain the loss. So it's more like the testing accuracy.
Yeah.
You use this one, you will be able to calculate the gradient like this. There's no problem for that one. And then later, then you say that if d delta belongs to, if they have some samples belongs to D, you have one pattern for the those kind of gradient. If they don't belong to D, you have another pattern. So you drag, maybe just use a clustering to divide it into two different types.
Yes.
But you still don't know whether it belongs to, you have two types, that's fine. But you level know which cluster or which type belongs to original D or does not belong to D, right? Do you assume, do you have some background, do you have some assumption? For example, if the prediction is more accurate, then you will say that it is more likely to be in D. If it's the accuracy is not very high, then you say, oh, it's very unlikely to be in D. Do you have? I mean, remember, I think before you have you should have assumption there.
Yeah. For example, for the loss, the training data set may have the less loss, and we can distinct these two types from the sorry, I'm not very sure.
Yeah, go back. I think that, I think my question is that, well, I guess I kind of understand how do they use the supervised learning to learn attack model. But for unsupervised learning, it will be harder for sure. But I feel that maybe there are some kind of
assumptions
or background knowledge. It's basically like based on your intuition. Well, if you have data, if you have an example or data sample belongs to the original training data, the performance will be better than that not belonging to the original training data set.
Yeah.
So that may give you some hint about how to use unsupervised learning, but I'm not sure. Yeah. You need to. I think the paper should explain that.
Okay. I will check it later.
Okay.
Yeah. For the attack modes, there have two attack modes. First one is passive. For the passive attacks, the attacker makes observations without modifying. And for the active attack, the attacker can actively observe and modify the model. For example, for a local attacker, he can assign gradient for a specific data X. Then the aggregator would abruptly reduce the gradient of loss. So the local attacker would get the different gradient. He can use a gradient to justify the membership inference. Okay, here is experiments. They used three data sets: CIFAR 100, Texas 100, and Purchase 100, to demonstrate our attacks are not limited in training. In our training algorithm, they also use the public pre-trained models. And here is the attack model. They use this model to output a component fx. If we only use the output component, it will be a blank box membership inference. And for the label, FCN, they use the two fully connected lines. Here are the details. And they use the three evaluation metrics. First one is attack accuracy, and true and false positive, and prediction uncertainty. In the standalone setting, attacking the phone training models, and we can see from the table 2 of table 3, if we use the last layer, the attack accuracy would be higher than the second to last layer. So we can get the first one conclusion. From the view of the impact of the outputs of the different layer, the last layer leaks more membership inference about the training data. And they compared the gradient, and we can see in this table, if we use the gradient to analyze the membership, then it will get a higher accuracy than the output. Then we can get the second conclusion: gradient leaks more membership information than layer outputs. And we also calculate the last layer gradient and the second to last layer gradient. We can see the latter layer of the gradient leaks more membership information. Okay. And from the view of the training size, we can see with the increase of the membership size, increasing of the size of a tank's training data set would improve the accuracy of the membership inference tank. And from the view of gradient
Can
norm,
you go back? Can you go back to the previous slide here?
okay.
Why increasing the size of the tax training data set improve the accuracy of the membership inference attack? You mean that, well, if you have more, if you see the table,
Because for the attacker, if he has a virus, he has the he has virus size of data set. That means
so for this line, let's say for this line, does that mean that for the attacker, the attacker knows that I have I know that this is the amount of data that belongs to the original training data set.
yeah.
Also can collect 5,000 of long member data samples. Then this is my accuracy.
Yeah. I think if the attacker have more have more data, so they can train the more accuracy model. So the attack accuracy
Yeah,
would be higher.
that's normal. That's normal. I don't have any doubt on that. But if you from a practical perspective, a more interesting scenario is that, well, I would like to say, let's say you already have, because perhaps you don't have so many member samples. You actually have very few of them, and then you have a lot of long member samples. But now it looks like you see here, it's more like you have a lot of member sizes. The member sizes are very much larger than the long member sizes. Basically means that while you actually know a lot of training data, that are used before. And then, long member data, actually, they are very easy to collect. But this one, they are not easy to collect from a attacker's perspective. But if you see the configuration here, looks like the member examples are much larger than long member examples.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm curious about. Do they have so let's say if in the practice I want to launch this attack, does that mean that I should have a lot of examples that belongs to the original data set in order to launch the attack successfully?
In their experiments, the training members already always larger than the non-member size. I'm not sure. You can see from this table. Training.
Yeah. How about How about this one? Yeah. How about this example here? This example looks like the training members, they all have 5,000, but non-training members, they have 10,000. So this one, well, at least a non-member is larger than the members. Do they have the performance somewhere in the table? I think the last table that they show me is kind of like this CIFAR 100, not the these Texas.
I checked the paper and actually the CIFAR 100 is outperformed than other data sets. So they only show the CIFAR 100.
Well, that's normal because you have, of course, you are outperform others, and because you have more training members compared to non-training members, and supposedly that basically means that you will be able to easily biased towards the training members here. So of course you will be more capable of detecting whether the image belongs to the whether the data belongs to the training data set or not. I mean, the performance is better on this data set does not mean anything because your setting is different. But they should have. I mean, they should have. They should have a lot. They should also have some report some results about Texas 100, right? And if that performance is not good, that basically means that my guess is right. Basically, if you don't have a lot of training members, then your performance, the attack, will not be very successful.
The accuracy is about 60%. So they didn't show the details of the taxes 100 and purchase 100. They only show in one table and didn't show the details.
Okay. Okay. And from the view of the gradient norm, we can see in the figure 4, the difference of the distribution of the gradient norm. We can see the AlexNet is more different than the next one is the DenseNet. The second one is ResNet. So we can see the AlexNet have the highest accuracy. So DenseNet have a second accuracy, and ResNet is not good than Alex and Dense. So we can get the conclusion 5. A model leaks more membership information when the distribution of the gradient norm is more distinct for the member and the non-member instance. Okay. In the federated learning dataset, they first analyze the passive global tanker. Because for the passive global tanker, they only can observation the model and cannot modify the model. So they use some specific observed epochs and use epochs to calculate the accuracy. We can see from the increase of the epochs, the accuracy will be higher. So if we use later epochs, we substantially would receive increase attack accuracy. And they also analysis the passive local attackers. They use the different number of attacker participants, and we can see
with the increase of the numbers of the local tankers, with the number of the participants, the accuracy will be degraded. So we can see the accuracy of the local tanks degrades for large number of participants. It's because the local tanks observe and aggregate model parameters of all participants, and some other participants would influence the local parameters. That means it will limit the extent of the membership leakage. And for the federated learning dataset and active inference attacks, for the active inference attacks, they use the gradient ascent. Gradient ascent, that means you normally you need to decrease the gradient, but if we ascend gradient, the aggregator would change, would tell you you need to decrease the gradient, so the gradient would be more different. So as a result, compared to the passive global attacks, we can see the active attack can gain higher accuracies. Okay, that's all. Thank you.